Hey guys, my name is Matthew, and this is my review of Everybody Fights, So Why Not Get Better at It by Kim and Pen Holderness. Here we go. So Everybody Fights is a book about marital conflict. So it's definitely marriage-based conflicts. The title is a little bit deceiving because it says everybody fights, and that's true, but it's specifically about marriages here. What's interesting or unique about this particular marriage book is that it is not written by an expert or experts in the field. They're not therapists, they're not doctors, they've not done extensive research at a university or anything like that. They're just people who are married, and they've been married for 15 years, and they rely heavily on advice they've been given from their pastor, Dr. Christopher Edmonston. So his advice is what carries through a lot of this book, although it's evident that the authors have taken a lot of time to do their own research, pull their own names. So it's not entirely all from him, I don't think, and so much of it is based off their own personal experience. So it's an interesting combination of actual research that they have done and some anecdotes from their own life and marriage, which I think is interesting and helpful. We'll get right into this review though. I'll be listing some of my observations of this book, starting from some things that I liked the most, and then going through the review to a couple things I didn't like as much. And at the end, I'll give my recommendation for who should purchase this book. Clearly, the best thing about this book, in my opinion, is that it is very readable. It's very, very funny. I felt like the humor that was laced throughout the book was my type of humor. My wife noted to me that as I was reading through this, that I laughed out loud multiple times, more often than I think I even realized. And that is not exactly normal for me as I'm reading a book. And so that was something she thought was noteworthy. And so we want to make sure humor is definitely a huge part of this book. Their stories, their anecdotes about their marriage and the fights they've had, each fight they have is chronicled in pretty good detail in the book, and it's really funny. I think they did a great job of bringing their personalities and their voices through in the book to just make it really funny. Another thing I really liked about this book is the transparency and the vulnerability they took in writing about their own personal conflict in their marriage. That can be something that's really hard to write about, telling the world about your personal conflicts. And what I found most useful about those is even the conflicts seem absolutely blown out of proportion and they get crazy and you're like, oh man, people are going to judge me if they found out about this. So many of the conflicts were really relatable, and I felt like, oh man, those are conflicts that I've almost literally had those exact conflicts with my wife, if not those exact ones, then very similar ones. And so the content was really relatable because they were able to be so vulnerable and share not only what happened in the conflict, but what they were thinking and feeling as it happened, and then hashed out how they were able to move forward in each conflict, which I think was incredibly important as well. So I think their vulnerability and their transparency was great in this book. I mentioned this just a little bit in the intro, but clearly, in addition to having received advice from their pastor, Christopher, they name him often throughout the book. In addition to that, they've also clearly done their research. And so one of the ways I know that is because I would mention a certain idea. My wife is a therapist. I'd mention a certain idea. I'd say, oh, stonewalling, who does that come from? And she'd say, Gottman. And I'd say, yeah, that's the name that they've got listed here for that as well. And so we were kind of playing a quiz game. I'd name a quote from a therapist and she'd try and guess who it was. She got a perfect score, by the way, throughout the book. But it's obvious it was well researched. They actually spent the time to find some studies, things like that. And they didn't just come up with these ideas or just take their therapist or their pastor. His word was not just, oh yeah, we trust that. They clearly did research on some of these concepts themselves and found the scientific evidence that kind of backed that stuff up. So I thought that was really good. One idea that I really liked was the idea of secret contracts. I don't remember what chapter it is, maybe 5 or 6, somewhere middling of the book. I found that was personally useful for me, just thinking about the contracts that we have that we aren't even aware of. They're not like things that we necessarily agreed on, but they're things that we've kind of fallen into those ruts in our marriage. And I think thinking about that as an idea was really helpful for me. So there were some new ideas, not a lot of new ideas, but there were a couple new ideas that I really appreciated. From someone who's read a lot of marriage books, it's nice to come into something and say, oh yeah, not everything here is something I already know, just told in a different way. There are a couple new things here as well, so that was good. Lastly, I'll say that this book is really relatable. I kind of mentioned that with the vulnerability, but throughout the entire book, I just felt like it was easy to read. It was relatable. It wasn't a difficult read. It's not a super long read either. So I think it's different than a lot of marriage books, just in how I think for whether you're a man or a woman, it's really, really relatable. I think it's an enjoyable book. And I just think overall, yeah, I think I enjoyed reading the book. Couple things I didn't like as much about this book. I mentioned that they kind of reference Christopher a lot in the book, especially in the first few chapters. And I don't think, something about that just rubbed me a little bit wrong. It's like, hey, yeah, we're not experts. We don't know anything about this stuff, but we talked to a guy who did, and we're going to tell you what he said. And it was like, it's a little bit weird. Something about that just kind of rubbed me wrong. I don't exactly know what it is, but it was like, why didn't Christopher write the book then if he's the one with all the great advice and you guys don't know anything? Kind of an idea. And that's not quite right, because obviously they have a lot to bring to and add to the conversation. I don't know. I just struggled with that. I will say one good thing about the way that they're talking about their therapist or their pastor or whoever that you're going to go and seek help from is it normalizes the idea of getting help in your marriage, which I think is so important. So getting help when they use this example of, hey, when your car needs an oil change, you go and get the oil change. When it starts making a funny noise, when something's going a little bit, sounds a little off, you go get it checked out, because that's important. And we should do the same things in our marriages. I loved the way that they talked about that part of it, but something about how much of the advice they claim comes from Christopher is like, okay, then why didn't Christopher, he could maybe have co-authored some portions of these or something, but he's like a main character who's being played in a side role or something. I don't know. It's a weird complaint, but it's there. Last complaint, which again, this complaint could be a good thing for you depending on where you are in life. The Holdernesses are self-proclaimed Christians. It's really evident from the book based on some of the language they use and even the fact that they go to their pastor for help. Yet there's no mention of Jesus at all in this book, or grace, or the Bible. It's not a biblical counseling book at all. There's no biblical elements here. And I think that's a little disappointing for me, just because if you're going to be so upfront about the fact that you're a Christian and then not have any of those elements at all, that something strikes me as a little bit false, I guess, about that idea. So again, maybe this won't bother you at all, and maybe it might even be a plus or a positive for you. That's fine, but for me, it was just a little off-putting. Now, before I get into my recommendation for this book, I do just want to point out there's an Amazon affiliate link in the description. If you do choose to use that link, it won't cost you any extra, but it helps out our channel a lot. Now, for recommendations, I actually recommend this book, if you're going to read it, to read it for married couples. And read it with your spouse. Maybe get 2 copies of it if that's helpful for you, but read it with your spouse. If you read it by yourself, it's really not helpful, right? Because you address one of the concepts that's from the book and then you have to explain it to them, and in the middle of a fight, that's really hard. But if you've both read the same concepts and have gained some of the same insights, then suddenly you have the ability to reference those things with your spouse. If you want to find out more about the Holdernesses because you follow them on YouTube and you enjoy their content, that would also be fine. It does give a lot of insight into their marriage and their life, and it's really interesting. But mostly I recommend this for people who maybe have not read a lot of marriage books. So if you're going to maybe purchase a couple copies of this for someone who you know who's getting newly engaged or is newly married, that would be a great use for this book. Overall, though, a really well-written book, and if you haven't read a lot of marriage books already, I think this would be a winner for sure. So this has been my review of Everybody Fights. If you've enjoyed this review, feel free to like, subscribe, and use the affiliate link in the description box. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, stay safe out there.